Good day to you. Thanks for rejoining me for another installment of Reading with Mr. Henry. Act 3, Scene 3 sets up Act 3, Scene 4. Let's get right to it. This is Hamlet. Remember, this is after the play. Hamlet's behavior during the play is a bit inappropriate, not only with Ophelia, but with the king and even with his mother. He's behaving in a rather impertinent manner, and you can imagine that Gertrude's probably not happy with him. And so, Act 3, Scene 4, page 245 in the Barnes & Noble edition, enter Gertrude with Polonius. And remember what Polonius's plan here is. Polonius tells her, "A will come straight. Look you lay home to him. Tell him his pranks have been too broad to bear with, and that your grace hath screened and stood between much heat and him." Side note 2. Your majesty has shielded him from much censure. In other words, let Hamlet know that you've been kind of protecting him. And then he says, "I'll silence me even here. Pray you, be round." And Polonius goes behind the arras as Gertrude says, "I warrant you, fear me not." And I withdraw. I hear him coming, and Polonius hides. Hamlet enters. "Now, mother, what's the matter?" "Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended." "Mother, you have my father much offended." And of course, there's duality here. Hamlet's referring to his own father. Gertrude's referring to Claudius. And she doesn't quite get that. And she says, "Come, come, you answer with an idle tongue. Go, go, you question with a wicked tongue. Why, how now, Hamlet? What's the matter now? Have you forgot me?" In other words, she's pulling a mom here. "Do you know who you're talking to?" And so he says, "No, I have not forgotten you. By the rood, not so. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife. And, would it were not so, you are my mother. Nay then, I'll set those to you that can speak." Oh, she's pulling a mom here for sure. Side note, I will find people to deal with you who can respond to your rudeness, i.e. the king. In other words, you're being really rude to me. I'm going to call your father. And so she says, "Nay then, I'll set those to you that can speak." And look here, and there's no stage directions here, but many stage productions at this point will have Hamlet approach Gertrude in a rather aggressive manner. And maybe even push her a little bit. And he says, "Come, come, and sit you down. You shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you." And it scares her, and she cries out, "What wilt thou do? If thou wilt not murder me, help ho!" And from behind the arras, Polonius says, "What ho? Help!" Hamlet hears that voice. How now? A rat? Dead for a ducat dead. And he runs over and runs his sword through the arras and stabs Polonius. And you hear Polonius from behind the arras say, "Oh, I'm slain." Gertrude, "Oh me, what hast thou done?" "Nay, I know not. Is it the king?" And you can imagine that's wishful thinking on Hamlet's part, to wish that maybe it's Claudius behind the arras and maybe I've just killed him. And Gertrude says, "Oh, what a rash and bloody deed is this." A bloody deed? And he's not even thinking about Polonius. He's looking at his mother and he says, "A bloody deed? Almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother." She doesn't know what he's talking about. "As kill a king? Aye, lady, it was my word." And then he speaks to Polonius. "Oh, thou wretched, rash, intruding fool, farewell. I took thee for thy better." In other words, I thought you might have been the king. "Take thy fortune. Thou findest to be too busy or to be too nosy is some danger." Now, stop there. Man, Hamlet's kind of laying the responsibility for Polonius's death right at Polonius's feet. And I guess there's some truth here. If Polonius hadn't been so quick to want to spy, then certainly that wouldn't have happened to him. Hamlet looks back at his mother, and you can imagine she's sitting over there, standing, wringing her hands, just in shock at what's happened. He looks at her and says, "Leave wringing of your hands. Peace, sit you down and let me wring your heart. For so I shall, if it be made of penetrable stuff, if damned custom have not brazed it so, that it be proof and bulwark against sense." Side note, if your sinful habits have not turned it, your heart, as hard as brass, making it impregnable to natural feeling. Now look, in case you're not clear why Hamlet is so angry with his mother, it goes back to A, her really quick marriage after the death of her first husband, and that makes Hamlet doubt her love for his father. And then secondly, that she married his father's brother. And again, there would be mixed feelings in the kingdom about this, about that act being perhaps incestuous. Some thought it was, some didn't think it was. Hamlet apparently thinks it does. And Gertrude, again, she has no idea what he's talking about. She says, "Oh, what have I done, that thou darest wag thy tongue in noise so rude against me?" And he's going to tell her what she's done in so many words. Such an act, dear mother, that blurs the grace and blush of modesty. An act that calls virtue hypocrite, takes off the rose from the fair forehead of an innocent love and sets a blister there. Side note, too, from a branding iron. Prostitutes were threatened with branding, though in fact it was never adopted as a punishment. Wow, he's making some really tough implied accusations against her. Such an act that sets a blister there makes marriage vows as false as dicer's oaths. Oh, mother, such a deed as from the body of contraction plucks the very soul, and sweet religion makes a rhapsody of words. Heaven's face does glow or blush, or this solidity and compound mass, side note, over the earth, okay, with heated face, as against the doom, and it is thought sick at the act. And she says, "Ay me, what act that roars so loud and thunders in the index?" And he says, "Look here upon this picture and on this." Now stop here. This is important to see this as if you were looking at a stage. The side note, at side note 8, says, Hamlet presumably produces two pictures, one of his father and one of Claudius. It seems likely that these portraits were miniatures, which were popular in the day. Skip that part. Some modern productions have both characters wearing these miniature portraits around their necks, like in a locket. Hamlet pulls one of his father out of his shirt and he draws Gertrude near to make the comparison. And so go back, it says, "Look here upon this picture and on this, the counterfeit presentiment of two brothers. See, what a grace was seated on this brow. An eye like Mars to threaten and command, a station like the herald Mercury, new lighted on a heaven-kissing hill." He's talking about his father. You can hear the admiration in his voice. "A combination and a form indeed, where every god did seem to set his seal to give the world assurance of a man. This was your husband. And look you now what follows. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear, blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor? Huh? Have you eyes? You cannot call it love, for at your age the heyday in the blood is tame. It's humble and waits upon the judgment. He's looking at his mother and he's saying, Mother, you are of an age where you can't act like a schoolgirl and get carried away by passion. You've got to have more thought and reason to these things and act as the woman you are. And he says, and what judgment, Mother, would step from this to this? Sense, sure you have, else you could not have motion. But surely that sense is apoplexed. For madness would not err, nor sense to ecstasy was never so thralled, but it reserved some quantity of choice to serve in such a difference. Stop. Side note 5. Judgment is never so much in the sway of madness that it does not retain the capacity to distinguish between two men who are so different. What devil was't that thus hath cozened you at Hoodman blind? Look at the side note with me. That cheated you in a game of blind man's bluff. In other words, the only way to explain this choice that you've made is that you were under the devil's influence, perhaps. What devil was't that thus hath cozened you at Hoodman blind? Eyes without hands, or eyes. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Start over. Ears without hands or eyes. I read it wrong again. Sorry. One more time. Take 3. Eyes without feeling, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes, smelling sans all, or but a sickly part of one true sense could not so mope. Side note 7. Would not be so weak. In other words, even one of the 5 senses working alone and poorly would have the ability to tell these two men apart. Or but a sickly part of one true sense could not so mope. Oh, shame! Where is thy blush? Rebellious hell, if thou canst muten in a matron's bones, to flaming youth let virtue be as wax and melt in her own fire. Side note 8. Sin, which Hamlet sees itself as hell and as rebellious because it causes us to rebel against our better sense. Sin, if you can make even an old woman's body mutiny against her better judgment, then hot-blooded youth will turn chastity into wax, melting it with the heat of its own passion. It's a really fine figure of speech. To finish, proclaim no shame when the compulsive ardor gives the charge, since frost itself as actively doth burn, and reason pardons will. And she realizes now what Hamlet's telling her, and she says, Oh, Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turn'st my very eyes into my soul, and there I see such black and grieved spots as will leave their tinct. In other words, Hamlet, you're forcing me to look at my own actions and perhaps my own soul, and I'm seeing the black parts of me, the bad parts of me. And none of us like to have our flaws, our misdeeds pointed out to us. He's not done with her, though. He says, Nay, mother, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty. Oh, speak to me no more. These words like daggers enter in my ears. No more, sweet Hamlet. And remember, he had said to himself, my words will be daggers, but I will use none. Man, he's certainly pulling out all the verbal daggers here, and he's not done with her yet. He says, a murderer and a villain. He's talking about Claudius. A slave that is not 20th part the tithe. Side note, 1/20 of 1/10. Okay. not 20th part the tithe of your precedent, Lord. He's a vice of kings. He's a cutpurse of the empire and the rule, that from a shelf the precious crown he stole and he put it in his pocket. No more. A king of shreds and He stops. The ghost is entering into Gertrude's room. Oh, save me and hover over me with your wings, you heavenly guards. What would your gracious figure? Alas, he's mad. Because what can Gertrude not see? She can't see the ghost. All she knows is that her son is talking to thin air. He looks at her, of course, and says, no, I'm sorry. He looks at the ghost and he asks, do you not come your tardy son to chide? In other words, when you feel guilty about something and somebody pulls you aside and says, listen, we need to talk, don't you immediately go, oh, well, about that thing that I haven't done yet. Okay, well, do you think he feels a little guilty, a little badly about not having avenged his father's death yet? And just the ghost's presence makes Hamlet think, okay, you're here to tell me to go do that. And so he says, do you not come your tardy son to chide, that lapsed in time and passion lets go by the important acting of your dread command? Oh, say. And the ghost says, do not forget, this visitation is but to whet thy almost blunted purpose. It's a nice figure of speech. How do you sharpen a knife? You use a whetstone. This visitation is but to whet thy almost blunted purpose. But look, Hamlet, amazement or bewilderment on thy mother sits. O step between her and her fighting soul. Conceit in weakest body's strongest works. Speak to her, Hamlet. Notice what he's telling her. They're telling Hamlet. Yes, I'm here to sharpen your purpose to get that business done. And then he says, Hamlet, look at your mother. She's bewildered. She's scared. And he says, step between her and her fighting soul, which is a lovely figure of speech for calm her. And so he turns around to her and he says, how is it with you, lady? And she's like, well, alas, how is it with you that you do bend your eye on vacancy, and with the incorporeal air do hold discourse? Forth at your eyes your spirits wildly peep, and as the sleeping soldiers in the alarm, your bedded hair, like life in excrement, starts up and stands on end. O gentle son, upon the heat and flame of thy distemper sprinkle cool patience. Whereon do you look? On him! On him! What, look how pale he glares. His form and cause conjoined, preaching to stones would make them capable. Oh, do not look upon me, lest with this piteous action you convert my stern effects. Then what I have to do will want true color, tears perchance for blood. To whom do you speak this? Do you see nothing there? Nothing at all. Yet all that is I see. Nor did you nothing hear? No, nothing but ourselves. Why, look you there. Look how it steals away. My father in his habit as he lived. Look where he goes, even now, out the portal. And the ghost exits. This is the very coinage of your brain. This bodiless creation ecstasy is very cunning in, side note, madness or ecstasy. Ecstasy was a word that described a kind of madness. Madness is very skillful in producing such hallucinations. She thinks Hamlet is stone cold crazy, and he's going to convince her otherwise right now. He looks at his mother and he says, my pulse, as yours, doth temperately keep time and makes just as healthful music. It is not madness that I have uttered. Bring me to the test, and I the matter will reword, which madness would gamble from. Side note, a task that a mad person would jump away from. In other words, I can explain and reword everything that's just happened. A crazy person couldn't. He goes on, Mother, for love of grace, lay not that flattering unction. Side note, please know what an unction is. It's a balm that soothes, but doesn't really heal. In other words, when we have a pain, if we scrape our knee and we put some numbing lotion on it or some kind of ointment just to numb the pain, it doesn't fix the problem, it just covers it up. Look at what he's telling her. Mother, for love of grace, lay not that flattering unction to your soul that not your trespass but my madness speaks. A trespass is a wrongdoing. You might even use the word sin. What he's saying here is, don't write me off as crazy, because if you do that, then it will allow you to not look at your own sin, at your own wrongdoing. He goes on to explain that. He says, lay not that flattering unction to your soul that not your trespass but my madness speaks. It will but skin and film the ulcerous place, whiles rank corruption, mining all within, infects unseen. Confess yourself to heaven. Repent what's past. Avoid what is to come. And do not spread the compost on the weeds to make them rancor. In other words, don't feed yourself a lie and allow the wrongdoing to continue. And again, his sense of wrongdoing is her marrying her husband's brother and her doing so too quickly. She starts to understand, look, Hamlet's difficult to follow. There's no question that any of us would struggle if we were Hamlet's friends or Hamlet's family members to follow him. But he does make himself clear. He exhorts her, confess yourself to heaven, repent what's past, avoid what is to come, and do not spread the compost on the weeds to make them rancor. Forgive me this my virtue. In other words, forgive me for speaking so strongly to you. For in the fatness of these pursy times, virtue itself of vice must pardon beg, yea, curb and woo for leave to do him good. And she's broken. She says, "O Hamlet, thou hast cleft my heart in twain." And he picks up her figure of speech and he says, "Oh, then throw away the worser part of it and live the purer with the other half. Good night, but go not to my uncle's bed. Assume a virtue, put on a virtue if you have it not." What he's telling her is, behave virtuously, even if you don't feel like it inside. And these are some lines here that really express kind of some fundamentals of the human condition. And this is way before modern psychology, and yet Shakespeare seems to understand us so well. Listen to this. Assume a virtue if you have it not. That monster, custom or habit, that monster habit who all sense doth eat, of habit's devil is angel yet in this, that to the use or practice of actions fair and good, he likewise gives a frock or a livery that is aptly put on. In other words, refrain tonight, mother, and that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence, the next more easy. For use or habit or practice almost can change the stamp of nature and either house the devil or throw him out with wondrous potency. Now stop there for a minute, and I want to hover on this for just a moment. Normally when we think of human change, of changing ourselves, we often think that it must be an inside-out proposition. In other words, we must feel the need for change, and then that will change our behaviors. But we know even from modern psychology and from even neurology, we know that sometimes if our behaviors themselves can actually even change the chemistries of our brain. In other words, you don't perhaps have to wait to feel virtuous in this case in order to act virtuous, and that sometimes acting virtuous causes one to be and feel virtuous. Shakespeare's brilliant here in his understanding of the human condition. Hamlet finishes by saying this: "Once more, good night, and when you are desirous, mother, to be blessed, I'll blessing beg of you." And then he turns to Polonius. Remember, Polonius's body's been sitting over against the wall. And he says, "For this same Lord I do repent, but heaven hath pleased it so to punish me with this," in other words, with the killing of Polonius, "and this with me," okay, we can read the side note, "me with Polonius's death, which will result in Hamlet's punishment." It doesn't matter that he's prince. He's facing some serious problems by having killed Polonius. And of course, there's the punishment of Polonius by Hamlet. And so he says, "Heaven hath pleased it so to punish me with this, and this with me, that I must be their scourge and minister. I will bestow him, and will answer well the death I gave him. So again, good night. I must be cruel only to be kind." Tell me you've heard that. It's a common idiom in our language. "I must be cruel only to be kind. This bad begins and worse remains behind." Side note, this is a bad beginning and worst things are yet to come. So, one word more, good lady. He's about to leave, he's trying to leave, but he keeps thinking of things to tell his mother now. And she predicts what he's going to tell her, and she says, "What shall I do?" And he says, "Not this, by no means that I bid you do." And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here. "Do not let the bloat king," of course he's talking about Claudius here, "do not let the bloat king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse. Do not let him for a pair of reachy kisses, or paddling in your neck with his damned fingers. Do not let him make you to ravel or disclose all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft." Side note, by cunning. In other words, sometimes when we're in really intimate moments with someone, we feel open enough to tell them all truth. And he's telling her, don't lie with him again. And because if you do, you might let it out that I am perfectly sane. In other words, he is enlisting his mother's help in fooling Claudius into thinking that Hamlet is mad. There is a shift in power in this scene. And so he's enlisting his mother's help. And he says, don't let him make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft. 'Twere good you let him know, for who that's but a queen, fair, sober, wise, would from a paddock, from a bat, from a jib, such dear concernings hide? Who would do so? No, in spite of sense and secrecy, unpeg the basket on the house's top, let the birds fly, and like the famous ape, to try conclusions in the basket creep, and break your own neck down. Oh my gosh, Hamlet, what are you talking about? Look at the side note. He says, the editor says, the precise story to which Hamlet alludes is lost. In other words, scholars don't know what he's referring to. Hamlet warns his mother not to let his secret out of the basket. If she does so, she, like the ape who fatally broke his neck trying to imitate the birds, will come to a bad end. Oh, that ape. Of course, we all know what you're talking about now. It was apparently some kind of fable that Shakespeare's audience would have been familiar with. Nevertheless, she assents here. Be thou assured, if words be made of breath and breath of life, I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me. I must to England, you know that. Alack, I had forgot. 'Tis so concluded on. There's letters sealed, and my two schoolfellows, and that's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, my two schoolfellows, whom I will trust as I will poisonous snakes fanged, they bear the mandate. They must sweep my way and marshal me to some knavery. Side note 4, they must prepare my road and lead me into some trap. He so doesn't trust them. And look what he says. They must sweep my way and marshal me to knavery. Let it work. Let it work, for 'tis the sport to have the engineer hoist with his own petard. Side note, blown up by his own explosives. Yikes, he's got a plan in mind for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Look what he says. And shall go hard, but I, because Hamlet knows he's smart, I will delve 1 yard below their minds and blow them at the moon. Oh, 'tis most sweet when in one line 2 crafts directly meet. Then he turns to Polonius, and most stage productions have him starting to pick up Polonius's body, maybe drag it out, and he says, this man shall set me packing. I'll lug the guts into the neighbor room. Mother, good night. Indeed, this counselor is now most still, most secret, and most grave, who was in life a most foolish, prating knave. Come, sir, to draw toward an end with you. Good night, mother. And they exit, Hamlet dragging or carrying Polonius's body off stage, picking up again that antic disposition. There's a power shift that just occurred in the play. Prior to this scene, it appears that Gertrude and Claudius are on one side and Hamlet is on the other. Now, Gertrude and Hamlet, mother and son, seem to be unified. And that leaves Claudius out here to sort of fend for himself. Claudius is not stupid at all, and he's got plans for Hamlet. Oh, the plot has thickened, and now that Hamlet has incidentally killed Polonius, the tension is going to ratchet up in a dramatic kind of way to push us toward the end of the play. I hope you're enjoying this, and I hope that you stick with me, because man, we're well into the play now. Hang with me, and I hope you guys have a good evening. Thanks.